And sometimes we don't think about the constraint of the thing is what allows for the great parts to come from it. Like the constraint of a canvas enables an artist to create the appropriate perspective to get an amazing painting. If they just had a huge wall, is very different than if they have a smaller canvas. And so I think sometimes in that we underestimate how the constraint of a thing can actually bring forth this kind of incredible, results or opportunities from it.
All right. Okay, well, here he is, Alex Waters. Alex, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, this is gonna be fun. When I first came across you, gosh, was that a couple years ago, maybe, and saw what
Yeah, a
you were
little while ago.
doing. Yeah, it sees what you're doing and how you're doing it, and it was something that's been on my mind. So to be able to have this conversation with you, it's a pleasure. So before we jump in, would you like to briefly introduce yourself and something about the program labs, briefly?
For sure. So my name, is Alex Waters. I'm a little bit of an East Coast transplant in San Diego. Been working in kind of the startup tech and small business areas, nonprofit areas for the last little over 10 years. And with the program labs, what we're doing is trying to rethink the best way to create social impact programs, specifically around entrepreneurship. And so we work with boards, nonprofits, foundations to really build them and then operate them at a pretty high level.
All right. And so you said you're a transplant. Where are you originally from?
So I'm originally from Maryland, like right outside Washington, D.C. So an area called Prince George's County, Maryland.
And so I like to start these conversations and set the foundation and the groundwork and what you thought you were going to be doing when you became an adult when you were younger. When you were in high school, middle school, your formative years, what was in your mind that you thought you wanted to do when you got older?
I thought I wanted to be a doctor. Yeah, it's that was the idea, and I was, yeah, into science, so I liked some of the things around mainly like biology and stuff like that. And I thought, okay, yeah, I'm gonna do med school, and then I'll be a doctor. And that was the idea about it. Didn't quite go that direction, but that's always the plan.
Well, when did that start to change? Were you already in college, or when did you say like, maybe I'm not going to do that?
Chemistry 113 was the
Wow, you know the exact class when you were like, no
exact
thanks.
class. I know that, and then I was in a biology class, was looking at, fruit flies where you do the sort of Punnett squares and you're testing the sort of like, "Oh, this one does this color eye, that color eye," and you're doing and I remember looking at them, and I was for the biology class and, like, looking out the window and being like, "What in the world am I doing?" Like, I don't really sort of enjoy this, and then chemistry 113 was like a semester, a little bit after that, and that kicked the doors off because I was like, I yeah, it didn't click in the ways that I would want for it to, no matter how much I studied and went through stuff. And I was like, I gotta do something else. So yeah, so I switched my major at that point to what I wound up in my degree in.
And what was that? What was your degree in?
Uh,
Okay. And when you made that switch, was it like, oh, I'm interested in this. I really enjoy this.
yeah, I wound up taking a class called Contemporary Moral Issues, and it was the first college class that I had where I didn't need an alarm clock to get up and go to it. I didn't need any prompting to do the work. I just devoured the books. I loved the study sessions, everything. It was just, I felt like I found a space where I really enjoyed all the work that was there. And so, yeah, it was a little interesting telling people you were going from wanting to be a doctor to getting a degree in philosophy. People were like, okay, so how's that supposed to work? But I thoroughly enjoyed it, and that kind of would kind of kick me off in the other direction.
And so when you graduated with that degree, what was the first, career job that you got into when you graduated?
Yeah, so I finished my undergrad, went to University of Maryland, College Park, and then I actually took some time off because I wasn't totally sure exactly what I was going to wind up doing. And I worked at the local campus post office and did some stuff sort of around little odd jobs. And then I came out to San Diego. I had to go to grad school. So I kind of just kept going and learning, got my master's out here, and then got into education technology. So EdTech once I was here, went back home, and that was the first foray into sort of like your real job. You go to, work, got a salary kind of thing at a company that was based in a place right outside Washington D.C. in Maryland.
Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about that time. You call it time off, but you were working during that time when you were doing those odd jobs, working in the post office, those types of jobs that you were doing. How long was that? Was this like a year, 2 years before you found, like you were going to get your master's?
Yeah, it was a year, and it was a little bit interesting because the way it had wound up working out is I graduated a little bit later, so about 4.5 years, because I spent a year living overseas in London. And then when I came back, I still wanted to take classes, so I took an entire semester of classes after I graduated, while I was still like working and studying and stuff. And so yeah, it was a year. I said, look, I'm going to take some time, figure out what it is that I want to do, and then went to pursue the master's in philosophy out here in San Diego State.
Well, the reason I ask of that year, because sometimes you don't, especially people that go right into school and you're trying to figure it out, and then you make that pivot and say it's not medical school, it's going to be this, and then you go out into the real world and you're working these jobs, and you're like, whoa, this is harder than I thought, and I know that as well as just about anybody because I worked a lot of
Yeah.
jobs that I learned a lot, but I didn't really enjoy doing. How did you look at that time when you look back on it now? Were there lessons that you learned during that year?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing was that you have to like time can go by very quickly because I worked at the University of Maryland, and so I worked at the campus post office, and I worked at the library there a little bit, and I worked in other jobs and places. And to just be quite frank, sometimes you would see folks who had been there for a long period of time that just seemed like they really couldn't stand being in the place, but they were there every day. And that to me was one of those kinds of cautionary kind of things to be like, wait a minute, I need to think about what are the things that I really like and enjoy doing because I don't want to be, someone who's counting down the days to retirement. And when someone says, well, kind of, I only got about 10 more years left. And you're just like, wow, that doesn't seem like a great space to kind of be in on an everyday basis if you just really, really don't like what it is that you're doing. And so that was more instructive than kind of anything else, I think, for most of the jobs that I wound up having or doing, or kind of the odd jobs that I was kind of taking on.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've learned in my life, and I've heard it echoed or heard people say this in different ways, but if you don't choose your direction, somebody's going to choose it for you. And if you don't have a plan, somebody's going to have a plan for you, and you're going to plan somebody else. So you got to do your own thing. Well, I want to talk about you getting into EdTech because once you got your master's, then your first job after that was in EdTech. What was it that prompted you to that, or that you saw it in that industry, in that field?
I wish I could say that it was like, a grand kind of plan and I had studied it and I realized that, education technology was a great space to be in and it was a growing industry. Really, I came back home to Maryland. I'd actually thought that I was going to go teach English overseas in South Korea, and I was planning out. I was like, I'm going to travel around, do all these kind of things, and so I took the job because I thought I was only going to be there for about 6 months. And it seemed cool. I was like, okay, yeah, I've done stuff, working with folks. I did some, enrichment programs with students who are like first generation to go to college with Upward Bound and stuff. So I was like, I could be the student support advisor thing for these folks getting master's degrees. And that turned into like 8 years of time in there doing a bunch of different kinds of things. So it wasn't a super well kind of intricately laid a plan, but I'm glad that I got the chance to kind of see what it's like inside of a rapidly growing, high growth kind of tech startup.
And let's talk about that experience. And first of all, this is how most people's careers are not
Yeah.
linear. You get an opportunity, you do something, or you fill a need at something, and then you grow from there. So 8 years is a decent amount of time. So congrats with that. What were some of the things that you saw during that 6 months or after that 6 months that you started to really get the vibe and really understand the flow of what it means to be a part of an organization like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that really hooked me into it was that it just seemed like boundless. Like there was so many different things that you could do kind of inside the organization. And I felt like I was learning all the time. And That's a common story if you're in sort of a earlier stage startup. It's like there's a lot of stuff where someone's like, "Hey, should we do this thing?" People are like, "Sure." You want to do it? It's like, "Okay, cool." And then you just kind of continue to kind of build and grow. And so I got a chance to move into some spaces and start to sort of manage people and learn what that kind of looks like because I didn't, I studied philosophy, so I didn't have like kind of a formalized conception of it. So it was, listening to Harvard Business Review podcast and watching stuff, online or reading books about some of those different kinds of things. And that's what kind of kept it always going. Like there was always new projects, new different, opportunities, new programs, new like everything was kind of happening all at once. And so, I learned a little bit of everything from compliance to admissions to student services to placement to operations to finance, like all of it was there. And people would, hey, you want to take on a project, sure, go for it. And that was kind of the thing that really kind of kept me there for a long period of time, was that there was just so much stuff that you could wind up doing.
And startups and the startup culture is very exciting. Like you mentioned, there's a lot going on, but also I've learned that behind scenes, there's a lot of chaos and there's challenges. How did you and your team handle those challenges?
Yeah. I mean, I think you hit the nail right on the head because there could be a lot of different kinds of things where, one day you're moving in this direction and all of a sudden you just have to start sprinting in the other direction. I think for me, I tried to not look at things as completely permanent with respect to we're doing this thing, but it could change. And I think that was a little bit informed by, the first day that I came in, I remember like it was yesterday, I walked into space to interview for the job and I walk in and there's like people sitting at like these IKEA desks with like phones. And I'm like, that doesn't look like a real business. This can't be the actual place. And they didn't even have a chair for me to sit. I'm like sitting on like a desk waiting to go into like the interview. And most people, when they had started at that point, like when you first got there, you put together your desk and your chair. And I tried to keep that kind of frame, even as we were growing bigger and bigger and bigger, so that you never lost the fact that a lot of the stuff, even though it might seem like it is, completely planned or structured, that the folks who are at the top were also still just trying to figure it out. And they didn't always have, the appropriate answers. And they might come down and say, hey, we're going in this direction. And it sounds really nice, but we had the opportunity in working in student services. A portion of the time we like shared the CEO's office. Like he'd have to go outside to make like important phone calls that we weren't supposed to hear. So we got kind of an inside look at a lot of the stuff that was happening. And so it kind of changed my frame. And I tried to impart that for the folks we were working with, where it's like, look, everyone's trying to figure some of this stuff out. We're in a new area, new industry. It seems pretty commonplace now, but you think back to 2008, 2009, online learning and doing video conferences and stuff for a lot of folks was still super new. And people were like, you can't do that. There's no way you can get a degree and it's any good by doing stuff online. Like, and it's just a very different kind of circumstances and scenario situation.
So how many people were at the company in the beginning and where did it end up 8 years later before you left?
Yeah. So we got when I got there, there were about, I would say, 50, 60 people. And then by the time I left, there were over probably about 1,300.
Wow.
So the company grew really big. It IPO'd, like they had the whole thing with the executive team at NASDAQ, and people got stock and all kinds of stuff. That's when I actually learned the difference between a very well-funded, startup that was kind of building and things like that, and um, what it is when it's, two people in a garage and like they say, oh, there's a company IPO and everybody got rich. It's like, well, not exactly.
Yeah. Kind of, not exactly. Yeah.
Um, But also it kind of taught me, I remember thinking when I got hired, I was like, man, they're gonna make a lot of money. I was like, can I trade some of my salary for stock? Absolutely not. So it was an interesting kind of thing around that. But yeah, so that was kind of it. They opened up several different offices where they were doing stuff internationally. At one point it was a pretty big company and they, were signing all types of universities everywhere.
What was the move after that? You were there for 8 years. Was there a strategic step after that company?
Yeah, so well, I actually really wanted to move back to San Diego. So at the time I was like, look, DC is cool, it's great, cool city, but I just, you know, I was I don't know, I guess I wanted to get some of the sunshine again and miss the winters. So, the plan was to move back to San Diego. I did some consulting work still with them for about another year and some change, afterwards, and then really, tried my hand at, an EdTech company. So there was me, there was one guy who he created a company and was working on some of the things I had heard about it. I was like, "Hey, I think that's an incredible idea." And the premise of it was that when you're trying to learn something, how do you kinda gather all that information in one place that's helpful that you can then also pass along to somebody else. And so we had worked on that for a little bit, but did all the things that first time startup founders kind of do, and it didn't really get to the point to sort of taking off. And that was the piece that got me a little bit more into sort of the startup and sort of small business community in San Diego. But the move out here was just I wanted to. I was like, I want to go back to the West Coast.
Yeah, location, location, location. So, okay, I want to talk about the program labs. And so, did you start it around that time? Like, what was the genesis of
No.
the program labs?
So the program labs was relatively. It's been a couple of years. 2 no, right around 2 years, from the sort of idea to kinda where we are sort of now. And the through line, I guess, would be I started working, with the Downtown San Diego Partnership, and they had a program that they had partnered with UC San Diego, to have kinda connect some of the dots as they were thinking about, "Okay, well, what does it look like to build this kind of, tech, small business, um, epicenter in the middle of downtown." So this was in 2016, 2017. So we ran workshops and we did different kinds of stuff. I was brought on to be able to do that. So Andy White is well known as sort of the startup community here. He gave me an opportunity to come in and learn a lot from him and start to build out some of those things. And then I got the opportunity to do the business accelerator at the Jacob Center, working with Connect. And so that was kind of it. When that was ending, then it was like, hey, well, what's the next phase? What's the next step? And it was like, well, I think I want to start something that does something similar to what we were doing there for that 5-year period of time. And I started a nonprofit. So folks were like, "Oh, well, let's normally I would give the advice to like not start a nonprofit to folks, and I've told people that before, and then it was like, "Oh, well, I think I want to start one." And so that's kind of the genesis of it, taking all of those learnings and then saying, "Hey, well, is there something that I think could be done differently and sort of in a new and novel way?"
Well, you mentioned in working with Connect and working with the startup community in San Diego, what are some of the things that you or high level takeaways, or they don't have to be high level. I guess any takeaways that you have that changed the way you thought about things? Because especially you had been working in them and working with people and seeing all the ups and downs. And was there anything specific that you can draw back on that you say, wow, like Andy or somebody else at Connect really showed me this part of the business that I didn't understand before?
Yeah. So from the partnership aspect, when I was working with Andy at the Downtown San Diego Partnership, the one of the key things that I think that I took away from that was really just you never know what piece of information is going to be very valuable to you. So it's probably best that you just put yourself in the position to learn as much as you can about what's happening. And that was something that I had done in the ed company, sort of like not in a more strategic way. It was just people would invite me to a meeting and it's like, well, I'm not on the sales team. They're like, yeah, but do you want to know and come to this thing? It's like, sure, why not? And I would just show up and be places. And so then you gathered all of this information, and that was one of the things that was really helpful, sort of there. And then also, I think the biggest thing for anybody in especially this ecosystem, it's a small world. It's not. I mean, yes, it's a big city, but it's a small sort of space, and so being around, getting to know people, really building relationships goes a long way because you never know who someone's going to be picking up the phone and asking about when you're doing something. Well, that's the first thing most folks do if you're a, start a founder and you're looking to build stuff, partner with people, even sales. People don't think about that. They think about it only in the course of investment. But even if you're just trying to sell a product to a company, Like the first thing people do is pick up the phone and be like, "Hey, let me talk to, hey, you ever heard of this company? You know this person, you know what they're doing?" And so really taking the time to kind of build those relationships, show up, deliver value is one of the, I think those are the kind of the two biggest things that I took away from my time, not only the partnership, but then when Connect was working with the Jacob Center and launched Connect All the Jacob Center, the Business Accelerator program.
So, on that note about being a sponge, really, you didn't use the word sponge, but really just taking the information. You don't know what's going to click and what's not. You also a lot of these concepts and theories, they're transferable. So you may hear something that somebody's doing and say, "Well, actually I can implement that into this." And so I think that's one of the big things about just being open to learning, whatever it is, because there can be something that you can learn from somebody else that maybe it had never dawned on you because you never worked in that industry or that type of product or that service. And you're like, wow, okay, well, I can try that over here and be wildly successful. So I love the fact that you brought that up. Um, as far as working with a lot of startups and working with incubators and working with people, is it hard at all for you to not become jaded or to maybe not jaded, but you see so many things come and go and hop and fail, and you see it over and over. And at some point, I can feel the energy. Sometimes people will be like, "Yeah, these are the reasons why it could not work." Like you've seen somebody fail. Like, what is your mindset around that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a real thing, and you do have to guard against that because everybody has, from based on their experience, a sort of positionality of like, hey, this is what works in this context, or you can only do this thing because I've seen it over the last 10 years or however long, and the only people that have done it this way. And I think taking the time to figure out that at the end of the day, whether it does or does not work, the process of going through and building something is going to yield some results. Because even the best of the people who had incredible ideas and raised millions and millions of dollars, and you hear about it every day, that doesn't guarantee success in that endeavor. But you can absolutely take those lessons and take those things that you gained and then move into another place, right? And I think sometimes, especially in the sort of the tech startup space, sometimes we look at it like, oh, well, you know, it's supposed to just be like a one-shot deal, and you start it and you're supposed to scale it and grow it and be a billion-dollar company. But in reality, like, a lot of the successes of companies come from when they hire someone who ran another company that didn't work, but they got a bunch of experience, they have a bunch of knowledge about how this particular industry works or how this field operates, and then they're able to come in, and that's the person who's the eighth hire, the ninth hire, like, and then it's off to the races. And I don't think, in a lot of cases, we don't talk about that enough as being like really central to what success kind of look like over time.
Yeah, no, I love that. And just because somebody hasn't had success, air quotes, success in something, that experience is valuable. And you see the memes of people that like first time founder and they're just hanging on. The second time founder is just like cruising along because they've been through it. They know it's going to be hard. There's going to be ups and downs, but there's value there in having that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I was talking to somebody about this the other day, and I think especially in the tech space, I don't see it as much sometimes in the small business area, but definitely in sort of the tech space. We've gotten to the point to where we like normalize things that are like exceptional. Creating a company, and we talk about, oh, a unicorn, or this person raised $1 million or 100 million, whatever it is. Those are like really exceptional feats when you look at all of the businesses and all of the people trying to do it. But in a lot of cases, we've just made it like, oh, yeah, that's just what happens. Like, and I think sometimes to the detriment of founders, because they're thinking that they're supposed to, do something. It's like, somebody's going to go play in the NBA, and someone's like, oh, that guy can't play basketball. It's like, no, actually, that guy playing in the NBA is like incredibly great. He might not be as good as, LeBron James, but make no mistake, like, that's incredibly impressive. And I think what we've done is we kind of tamp down when people are building, solid businesses or companies because, they don't have the story of, being with a couple people and creating a, billion-dollar company.
One of the things that I've noticed, and I don't want this to sound too derogatory towards anybody in particular in the San Diego startup community. Or maybe I do, I don't know. But I feel like there's a lot of people that will say like why it can't be successful or what the problems are, what the challenges are, and what the headwinds. And I think there's value there. But I didn't feel so far, just in my experience, that there's a lot of people that offer solutions or connection. That to me, and I don't think anybody should be given handouts or anybody should, there's no perfect roadmap.
Right,
But
right.
I found the people that are the most useful are like, oh, this is the type of challenge. This is the person that you may want to talk to about this. And so tell me about your experience there. Is there anything that the San Diego startup community in your mind could do better?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of I think just to tackle a question, there's a couple of different kind of ways around this. So the first part is think, and I've had to like catch myself sometimes too, where sometimes folks think that they're helping by telling you what like won't work or what not to do. And that's their way of hopefully sort of shielding you from going down the wrong path. And I think sometimes that can come off as really abrasive if you don't know who the person is. If you don't know someone and automatically you tell them your idea and they give you 40 reasons why it's not going to work, it's like it's not a great experience at all for the founders. And so I think that that's a piece of people trying to be supportive or helpful, but then also like context is everything around what relationships look like. The other part is I think that we don't ever talk about sort of this hidden piece of social capital. And that part is people will say that they want to, help or provide you with a resource, but they have in their head an internal hierarchy of where they've positioned you to who they might introduce you to. And that part, it's kind of like the unwritten, unspoken thing of people looking and testing and seeing where folks are before they make the introduction to an investor or make an introduction to somebody who they hold in really high regard. It'd be much easier if it was just like, hey, I need to be in front of this person 10 times before they'll introduce me to somebody versus them saying, I'll introduce you to somebody. And then it's like they give you a resource that you could have Googled. Right? And it's like, well, that's not as helpful as I thought it was going to wind up being.
Sure, sure. That makes perfect sense. And I say this, mind you, this is not a fully formulated thought. This is just how I feel. It's just like I thought there would be more help or more. I don't know. Again, I haven't fully formulated how I think about it, but I just know how I feel. But I think that's also part of the process. And I'm not bitter about it, but it's just like, hey, no one's going to save you. You got to figure this out your own. And, when you do come across people along the path that are helpful, great. You hold them close and dear and you don't forget about it. But the people that don't, it's okay. They're busy. They have their lives. They have their priorities. And so is what it is. The show goes on. How bad do you want it?
Yeah, I mean, it's always interesting because, like, obviously, with a lot of my work is like sort of working directly with entrepreneurs and trying to connect them to resources and different kinds of things. It, I do wish that there were more of I don't know, like more opportunities for what you consider to be a roadmap of at what phases and stages should people be getting to certain things. And I think it's really hard for folks to figure out what that looks like as they are kind of navigating it through kind of themselves. Or if they do have some resources, it's like the best analogy I can give is like, you go to, you know, high school, college, whatever. It's like, okay, look, you need this many credits across these things, and then you can walk across the stage. And how you decide to get them and when you decide to get them, in some cases it's up to you. But at the end of the day, you need these things. And at certain points, we will promote you to the next thing. So we will no longer call you a freshman. We'll call you a sophomore. And then we'll call you a junior, right? Like, and I don't think in the entrepreneurship space, there is that thing that is like, okay, I have these things checked off. Now I move to the next kind of gate. It's kind of, oh, well, I did this thing over here that was, yeah, like, yeah, but you didn't do these 5 things over here. It's like, well, nobody told me I had to do these 5 things over here. So why did somebody tell me that? I wouldn't have spent my time doing this thing over here. And that is a challenge. That's something that I've thought about a lot in terms of like mapping out ecosystems and trying to provide support for folks because people don't know. The great thing about entrepreneurs is they just do it. They just go and do it. Like I don't know how this is supposed to happen, but I'm just gonna start running. And if you tell me that it's the wrong direction, cool. I'll just make a U-turn, but I'm still gonna keep running. And that is a hard part of because everyone is at different phases and stages and has different gaps in their knowledge or what they know or who they know. And it's like, so I do really wish that, I don't know, maybe with AI, somebody will figure out some, you know, clever way to help people as they're going along sort of in their journey.
First of all, I love that analogy about the credits in school and how you figure out. It's a great analogy. And also, that's life. There's no life plan. And you can say, yeah, you do this, and then you get to this age, you do this. And yeah, for the most part, but that's the beauty of it too. And that's what I always try to remember in his journey. This is life. And just like all the other challenges and obstacles you have to get over or through or around, that's what this is. And so when you keep that mindset, that's where you go, oh yeah, that's when this is. It's not a game, but it can be fun if you treat it accordingly.
Yeah, and that's why mindset is really important around things,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, I'd love to add this as well because you just triggered me on something that one thing that I learned probably in the first, well, a couple things, but one thing that I learned early on was that to not slow down or not stop at least. No one's going to save you. No one's going to do this or that. And I thought that there was this, I'm going to call it an exit, but there was an opportunity and I'm building ranges specifically. I'm building and it's like, oh, there's this opportunity. So I basically stopped building to explore this opportunity. Then when that fell through, I felt like I lost momentum. So, oh man, all right, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm just moving forward. And if I need to slow down a little bit to, have a conversation, great. But the building, the process, the momentum is not stopping. And you got to keep moving forward. And I learned that early on. Another thing, and this goes back to what you said, what we were talking about, is sometimes it can come off a certain way when somebody tells you what not. Early on, I needed to hear that. When I had the idea for ranges and I started working towards it and I got the provisional patent and I did the secret and I did some of these early stage things. And a friend of mine told me, he's like, listen, nobody's going to fund you. He said, and I've said this on other episodes before, but it stands to be repeated. He's like, you never built a product before. You don't come from a tech background. You don't work in the golf industry. You're not even good at golf. So I hear self-admittedly, I'm not even good at golf. No one's going to fund you. He's like, you need to build this yourself. And hopefully at some point it gets traction. And that's what I needed to hear. And it hurt a little bit, but also I was like, yeah, that makes sense. It's good to hear that.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I am all for giving the, you can say sort of like the truths, sort of as I see it as it relates to a person. But the thing I think that in the example that you gave is like, hey, this is somebody that I know. So I already know that they are probably going to give me information that is like in my best interest versus, and I've had this happen to me before too, where, I think I was being helpful by telling someone all the, kind of holes in what the thing it was that they were doing. And I don't think that necessarily they walked away feeling any better. And so maybe some of the information was right, maybe some of it was wrong, but it probably didn't hit the way that I thought it was, where it's like, oh, now you can eliminate all these things and go do something else. And they're like, forget that guy. Like, as they kind of go and hopefully continue building, but sometimes, get frustrated and potentially stop.
Yeah. Well, and he never, in no way said, don't do it. In no way. He was like, no, this is great. He was like, just from a business standpoint, from an investment standpoint, and also from what I've heard from other people during that time, and it's true that in San Diego, it's hard to like build a product or especially a software and a hardware, or even if it's just a product or a CPG, it's hard. And you see all these big checks going to like biotech and life science, and you see all this capital flowing there, and all the other people that are building something cool, it's fun. They're like, hey, like this is there too. And then people always said, well, if you're in New York or San Francisco, it'd be much different story, which, maybe not. I don't know.
I I typically tend to think that sometimes that's always like, the grass is always greener someplace else because I've heard stories of founders who are in the Bay who are like, man, I can't find money anywhere. And it's like, well, aren't you like at the epicenter of it? Like, and they're like, no, man, you go to Austin or, New York or other places. And it's like, I can't, there's no money anywhere. So it's, yeah, I think every place has its unique sort of challenges, but that is a good point what you mentioned, sort of like the biotech and life sciences. Those checks are very large when you're like, wow, okay, but how they have the infrastructure set up, and it's kind of like a little bit of a black box. And I won't lie, I have no idea half the time when you read. It's like, what are they doing? Again, it's like, what's that company doing? But they're finding some successes out there. So
Yeah, yeah. So let me ask you this. I want to talk more about program labs and what it is that you do. I want this to be a platform also you to share your successes, the things that you're looking for and how you do. Open mic here. Like walk me through what you're most proud of and what you're doing and toot your own horn a little bit here. Cause I think it's cool what I've seen so far, but I'd love for you to share from your vantage point.
Uh, also for me, kind of we were talking about before, the genesis of it was I was working, building programs, and I kept seeing kind of the same sort of challenge over and over again as it related to funding, as it related to getting sort of awareness of different kinds of things. And then I realized that sometimes, despite best efforts, organizations are not necessarily aligned with the programs that they are putting out into the world. And so at that point, I kind of drew on, well, from a business background, it's the same thing as product development. If a company is having a product, then they need to know where that product fits in their portfolio, how it needs to be structured, and what they expect to get from that product so that there is no misalignment when whatever the results kind of come back. And so for the last year, I've been really trying to dig in and figure out, okay, well, what does that look like? How do you assess that? How do you provide people with that so that they're very clear and that also then their programs can deliver the successful things for communities, specifically more so from an economic development perspective. But yeah, so that's the big thing. And we've been doing some work with College of Continuing Education, and we built out a business resource center here. And we just graduated our first cohort working with them. So that was pretty cool last week. And so, yeah, it's how do we put in the frame of thinking differently about how we actually build programs so that they are sustainable, but also, like I said, kind of aligned with what the organization wants. Not every program is supposed to be, the flagship program for an organization. Not every program is supposed to last for 20 years as the organization is set. Some of them are designed specifically to get attention for the larger organization, or some of them are supposed to be an anchor, which the money comes in from that program that funds all the other programs that aren't going to attract the same kind of attention. But I don't think when a lot of times people are building programs, that intentionality is sort of there. It's like, is this program just for PR? Okay, cool. So how do we structure it and make sure that all the parts at the beginning lead us to having those stories and those videos, and a lot of times that stuff is kind of an afterthought. And so what I want to help people do is to make sure that it's at the forefront so that they're very clear boards and organization people that work inside of them.
Yeah, so it's clear and intentional, and there's different strategies involved for each method. In your vision, and maybe you have one, but as we already talked about in the startup code, sometimes you could have a vision, like a general vision, and then a lot of the other things may change. What does success look like for you for the program labs?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it is, growing the organization, but really laying a framework and a blueprint that other people can come and pick up, right? Whether that's an assessment, whether that's tools that we're providing to folks so that more people have it, because I've seen the frustration and stress around people who are doing really great work inside of nonprofits and social impact organizations because there isn't this thing that tells them exactly how they should be building or what things should sort of be aligned. It's actually a really interesting parallel between a lot of nonprofits and a lot of startups um, that sometimes people don't make the sort of the connection. But one thing that happens a lot in startups is people are successful at doing a particular job, and so folks say, okay, now you can go do this thing over here, and I'm pretty confident that you're going to be able to do it. There is no training. I'm not going to train you on how to do it. Just go. And that happens all the time. People are like, oh, well, that's just how it works. The same thing happens in nonprofits all the time, where it's like someone might be working and they're like, okay, cool. You work in a program. So now what I want you to do is go and design these programs and build these things. And people are like, I actually don't know how to do that. Like, where am I supposed to go to get help and assistance or even just talk to people about how this is structured? And so I'd love to figure out success long term is alleviating that stress. Because if you can do that, then I think you can get just overarchingly better outcomes for what they're actually trying to do and the impact that they're trying to make across communities.
Normally with these shows, what I try to do in the conversation is tease out the different tools that you use, the talents that you have, and the techniques that you implement to be successful. But we're gonna do an experiment here,
Okay.
and
I love,
I'm just gonna flat. Maybe this turns into the template. I don't know. Let's figure it
I
out.
love it, you know?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's experiment. Let's talk about the tools that you use. Is there anything in your tool belt that you use that you think is important to be successful?
Anything in the tool belt specifically.
Any softwares that you use, any things that you're like, wow, this is a game changer that I implement in our process.
Yeah, I mean, I think, really kind of there are a lot of tools that people have, like CRMs. So doing that. Uh, so right now we're using Spot to kind of build out some of the things and then track some of the stuff that we're working on. Uh,
I'm a big fan of HubSpot. HubSpot is it's robust, but it's very intuitive as well. And I feel like you can do so many things. And I feel like I've been in the deep dive in it, and I still feel like I'm just scratching the surface.
Yeah, yeah. So that I mean, that's one thing that is there. I mean, obviously everybody now is using different AI tools and trying to figure out what all those work. So I use all of them. ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, to kind of figure out what are some of the best ways to do things. Jotform is one that I've been using recently. That I actually like a lot because it has a lot of different functionality, not just for surveys and gathering information and data, which for nonprofits are really important to have something that you can quickly spin up and be able to sort of have there sort of set and structured. So those are it. I mean, everybody uses like G Suites and stuff like that, but like those would be the bigger things. I go back and forth with using like, Confluence and Jira, because I've seen how at a very elite level that can be incredible to have just everything, all the decisions. When I was at the company, I had a VP who he created like this thing he called the brain, and it literally was like, oh, okay, they made this decision that impacted these 12 other things. And here's the email that was there so that when anybody looked into it, they could see, why do we do this thing again? Because it was never kind of like laid out for everyone to know that that was a change or that was a shift. But you might be talking about millions of dollars shifting because, somebody made an agreement with a dean to do something at a particular time and they kind of the legacy of those things. So I think those would be the biggest kind of tools that I use from a sort of software perspective.
Yeah, I would imagine that that's a double-edged sword. You could be like, who started this and who gets the credit for it? Or who gets the blame for this?
Yeah.
Who kicked this off that
Yeah.
we're all eating from it right now? Ugh. All
Yeah.
right, that's funny. Okay. Talents. Because you mentioned a through line and the things that you've learned. Are there certain things that you've learned about yourself that the certain talents that you have that you've learned throughout your evolution?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, the biggest talent that I have is I'm really, really good at teaching myself things. And so I know how I learn best. And so, regardless of what particular thing it is, I know how I'm going to best be able to receive that information. And I think that gives, a little bit of an advantage over some folks who are like, oh, well, just go and, you know, read this paper on this topic. But I know myself and what and how I learn. And I'm like, it doesn't matter if I read the paper on the topic. What I actually need to do is watch 10 interviews on the topic and then go, look at a podcast or some other kind, like there's other ways to be able to do stuff. And I think sometimes people may not know exactly how well they learn particular topics or particular sort of subject matter. And so that hurts them because they keep going back to the same way to learn everything. And I think we're all different for different kinds of things because the brain works in different ways for different people. So that's one thing. And then, uh, yeah, I think I have a pretty good talent for kind of connecting the dots. So there's sometimes I can see things where people are like, "How is that held together?" And I was like, "Well, it's actually this thing and this thing." And so, uh, so for me, my brain is always kind of working in that kind of way. So immediately when somebody asks me, you know, "Hey, I do this thing here," my brain is automatically thinking about like, "Okay, who can like how can I connect them? What resource do I know? How do I know about this thing here?" So yeah, so those would be the two kind of biggest ones.
Yeah, well, so and actually that bleeds over into the techniques of how you learn, and I feel like that point, that concept, the meta concept of learning how to learn is one of the most valuable things that somebody can have, because then it doesn't matter what it is, you know if you're interested in it, you know how that you can best figure it out. So, I guess on the technique side of things, if there is another technique that you've learned in that regard, is there any other way that you've learned like, "Oh, if I just do this a little differently, this will be a better outcome?" Are there any techniques you can think of?
Yeah, I mean, so I think one thing that I would say is sort of formalized, but there are times when I know, and this sound pretty simple, but for certain areas, I know that I might not necessarily be strong in, or it takes me a little bit longer to get something. So really then giving myself the grace to not pick something up as fast as maybe somebody else does, or as fast as I might in another area or another particular kind of thing. And that sometimes can be a little challenging because if you're trying to go do stuff, like I know me, I have to sometimes slow down and give myself the time to say, okay, this is going to take me a little bit more time than it would in this other area. So let me just pause and go through and be able to do stuff. Also, I am a massive proponent of whiteboards. I have several in my house. I literally go and like it's the visual part of being able to write stuff down and draw stuff out and just have sort of running tallies is a technique that I'm a huge proponent of, and I think people should do a lot more, whether it's on a whiteboard or just on a random piece of paper. But getting out how the connections are set and what are the different kinds of things and how stuff all fits together, I think is really helpful because sometimes when people see stuff, it it just hits differently. You just see something, you're like, okay, well that's or if you have to explain, like explaining to someone how to draw out. I was literally just talking about this with somebody the other day. I was working with the organization and they were telling me that it was complicated how the structure was set up. So I'm like, okay, I start drawing it out and I'm like, okay, so this is connected to here. And they're like, well, not really. It's this other piece here that does. And it's like, okay, well, explain it to me. And it took them a while to get to the portion of the explanation. But once they did, they were like, wow, okay, that's even different than I was thinking that it was because I don't always talk about the entire system or structure collectively. And I don't have to explain it to somebody enough to draw it. I just say that this happens over here and that happens over there, but actually being like, I don't know anything about your org, so I can't make any assumptions um, when I'm kind of working with folks and doing things. And so that to me, I think sometimes would be really, really helpful.
Yeah, that's a great point, and, knowing something well enough to do it versus knowing something well enough to explain it versus knowing something well enough to teach it. Those are different levels, and, another part of that is I love what you mentioned about it's working a different part of the brain when you see something or when you read it, and then when you write it down, when you speak it, all those things contribute to understanding. And that's why I feel like journaling has been big for me and just being able to write things down, not just like a task list,
Yeah.
but getting something out of your head and speaking it is one thing, but actually writing it down and making it tangible often clicks something that makes it that much more real.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. There is something about because it's like when you're writing something down, it's like it's for someone else normally. Even if you're trying to figure it out, like the fact that you're writing it down, it's like, oh, okay, well, this is how you would communicate with another person, not just me, even if nobody ever sees it. And so that there's a book. I went to a program years ago, the Alt MBA, and I did some coaching in it, and they had this book called A Beautiful Constraint. And sometimes we don't think about like the constraint of the thing is what allows for the great parts to come from it. Like the constraint of a canvas enables an artist to create the appropriate perspective to get an amazing painting. If they just had a huge wall, is very different than if they have a smaller canvas. And so I think sometimes in that we underestimate how the constraint of a thing can actually bring forth incredible results or opportunities from it.
What was the name of the book?
It's called A Beautiful Constraint.
Okay. All
Yeah,
right. Well, that's going on the list. That's
yeah,
going on the
yeah.
list. Got to check it out. I love that.
Very
That's
well done
amazing.
book too. It's like, and that's like an overarching thought around it. But sometimes we look at constraints as like negative things, but constraints can actually really open up the frame to be able to do something. And almost, I don't say almost everything, but like, for example, every game that anybody plays, like the constraints of the rules. And that's what enables people to get on the same page and play the game and have fun with it. Otherwise, you'd be like, well, what are you doing over there? How's this working over here? It wouldn't work. But we don't ever say, you know what I really love about, well, Monopoly is one of my favorite games. You know what I love about Monopoly? The rules. I love the rules. And like people's like, nobody's gonna say that. But that's what actually enables all of the permutations on the inside to kind of deliver what I consider to be quality gaming experience, depending on how you feel about Monopoly.
Yeah. Well, listen, Alex, that was a lot of fun. I really appreciate it. And you know, kudos and congratulations on everything you're doing, not just for yourself, but for all the people that you serve and that you work with. I'm going to have all your contact information in the show notes, but is there any parting thoughts that you have? Any parting wisdom? You already shared a lot, but if there's anything, I want to give you this opportunity here.
I mean, I really appreciate the time to just come on and chat. I learn from these conversations a ton, even just kind of thinking about different things and kind of how to phrase it and stuff like that. But yeah, no, I mean, folks can check out the program labs on www.theprogramlabs.org. Yeah, you can pop by the business center space or any of those different kinds of things, and I'd love to connect with folks. So
Alex Waters, thank you.
awesome, thank you.